The first time I saw her storm toward me, I honestly thought she might be coming to warn me about something urgent. Her floral blouse was flapping in the hot July wind, sunglasses perched low on her nose, and her arms pumping like she was marching into battle. It was only when she opened her mouth that I realized the only emergency was the one she thought she was creating. "This RV is parked here in violation of our community ordinance," she declared, planting herself between me and the driver's side door. "You have 24 hours before we have it towed at your expense." My coffee was still in my hand, steam curling lazily upward as I blinked at her. 24 hours? For what? The lot my RV was sitting on had been in my family for decades, passed down from my grandfather who bought it as a permanent vacation spot long before there even was a neighborhood here. I'd been coming here since I was 6, fishing off the small pier and camping under the stars before any houses ever lined this street. And yet, here she was, a woman I'd never met, announcing herself like a sheriff in some dusty old western, but with HOA bylaws instead of a badge. I tried to keep my tone calm, partly because I didn't want to wake the rest of the campground with yelling, and partly because I knew if I matched her energy, we'd be in a screaming match within seconds. "Ma'am, this lot isn't under any HOA, I said, sipping my coffee. "You might want to check your map before you make threats like that." But Karen wasn't the kind to be thrown off by facts. She tilted her head, smirked like she was already 2 moves ahead, and pulled a folded paper from her oversized tote. "I've got the authority of the board right here," she said, thrusting it toward me like a court summons. "Your grandfather's special status expired when the new covenants were adopted last year. You're on our turf now, buddy." I could feel the burn rising in my chest, not from the coffee, but from the audacity of this stranger rewriting my family's history in her head. I took the paper and scanned it. It was a copy of some HOA document, all official-looking with its serif fonts and legal jargon. But right at the bottom, in small print, was the date of enforcement. "Applies to all properties incorporated into the association after July 15, 1998. My lot deed said June 2, 1984. Not only did her authority not apply, it was laughably irrelevant. But instead of explaining, I decided to let her dig her own hole. "Interesting," I said, folding the paper neatly and handing it back. "You sure you want to go through with this tow order?" She puffed up even more, clearly convinced I was bluffing. "Absolutely. My husband's on the enforcement committee. He'll be here with the truck by tomorrow morning if you're still here." I could almost hear the smug italics in her voice. That's when I made my decision. I'd been planning to quietly enjoy my week off work, fishing in the mornings and barbecuing in the evenings. Now it was time to remind Karen exactly who she was dealing with. I spent the rest of that day pulling out my grandfather's old metal deed box from the RV storage compartment. The original papers were inside, complete with county seals and my grandfather's looping cursive signature. I even had a copy of the county's zoning exemption for our lot, signed by the mayor at the time. The next morning, just as the sun was cutting over the treeline, I heard the low rumble of a diesel engine. Sure enough, a massive tow truck pulled up, and out stepped a man with Karen's same pinched expression, though his was framed by a salt and pepper beard. He gave a short nod, like this was just another routine job. Karen strutted beside him, her phone out, already recording for evidence. That's when I stepped forward, deed in hand, and said, "Before you hook up a single chain, you're both going to want to see this." I opened the folder like it was a magician's reveal. There it was, me grandfather's deed, the county's stamp, the date, the zoning exemption. I watched Karen's confidence drain from her face like someone had pulled the plug. Her husband leaned in, squinting, then gave her a side eye that could cut steel. "Karen, this isn't in our jurisdiction," he muttered. But she waved him off, insisting it must be fake. I handed over a laminated county clerk verification letter, just in case. She took it, read it, and for the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. The neighbors had started to gather by then, whispering and laughing behind their hands. A man from 2 lots down called out, "Told you that wasn't HOA land, Karen." Someone else actually started clapping. The tow truck driver stepped back, muttering something about not wanting to be part of a lawsuit, and Karen just stood there, trembling not from anger this time, but from the realization that she'd overplayed her hand so badly, the whole street would be talking about it for months. Karen's lips were pressed so tight they looked like they might disappear into her face. Her phone, still in her hand, had stopped recording. Either she didn't want evidence of her own embarrassment, or her fingers were trembling too much to keep the camera steady. The tow truck driver gave me a respectful nod and turned back toward his rig. "Sir, sorry to bother you. Looks like this is a misunderstanding." That one-word misunderstanding made the neighbors snicker even louder. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an ambush that backfired. Karen's husband muttered something about checking with the board, but I could tell he already knew there was no case here. His steps were heavier on the way back to the truck, like he was dragging the weight of his wife's stubbornness with him. Karen, however, lingered. She looked me up and down, as if trying to find a crack in my armor. "We'll see about this," she hissed, jabbing a finger toward my RV. "Don't get too comfortable." Oh, I was comfortable, all right, comfortable enough to smile, wave, and turn my back on her. It was the kind of dismissal she wasn't used to. She thrived on people engaging, shouting, getting flustered. I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. By noon, the story had already spread. A couple from across the lane brought me a slice of homemade peach pie as thanks for finally shutting her up for once. An older man named Frank, who'd been quietly watching from his porch, came over with a battered manila envelope. "Thought you might want this," he said. Inside were photocopies of letters Karen had sent to half the neighborhood over the past 2 years, fake violation notices, bogus fee demands, even a threatening letter to a widow down the street who dared to plant roses without approval. Frank explained that Karen wasn't even officially on the HOA board. Her term had ended a year ago, but she'd refused to give up the title. She still had the letterhead, and apparently that was enough for her to keep playing dictator. Suddenly, this wasn't just about my lot, it was about a pattern. That evening, I decided to pay the actual HOA president a visit. Her name was Sandra, a woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and the kind of porch that smelled like fresh-baked cookies. When I showed her the letters from Frank's envelope, her mouth fell open. "She's been doing this again?" Sandra said, rubbing her temples. "We told her last year to stop. She's not supposed to have any access to enforcement matters. We even changed the locks on the office after the incident." "What incident?" I asked, leaning in. Sandra hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She tried to tow the wrong car from a board member's driveway. Turned out it belonged to the sheriff's cousin. We barely avoided a lawsuit. But if she's targeting you, and you're not even in the HOA," she trailed off, shaking her head. "That's a whole new level of stupid." We made a plan. Sandra would call an emergency HOA meeting, invite the residents, and put Karen on the spot. I would bring my deed and the pile of forged violation letters as proof. But there was one more piece to set the trap. The next morning, I saw Karen out front, talking to a younger man in a polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses. He had a clipboard and was jotting things down while she pointed at my RV like it was a crime scene. I recognized him was a private repo agent. So she was making another move, probably thinking she could sidestep the tow truck company that backed off yesterday. I let her have her moment. Then, right on cue, a white county vehicle pulled up, and out stepped Deputy Harris, the sheriff's cousin. Apparently. He walked right past me and straight up to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "You're aware that attempting to seize property on land outside your HOA jurisdiction can be considered harassment, right? And that falsifying HOA documents is fraud." The way Karen's eyes darted between the deputy and the repo agent was almost comical. The agent looked confused, muttered something about needing to check the contract, and practically jogged back to his car. Harris stayed long enough to hand Karen a printed warning notice and tell her that if he had to come back for the same reason, it wouldn't just be a conversation. That night was the emergency meeting. The community hall was packed, every folding chair taken, people standing along the walls. Karen sat near the front, arms crossed, clearly thinking she could talk her way out of whatever Sandra had planned. But when my name was called and I stepped up to the microphone, holding the stack of evidence, The room went quiet. I laid it all out, the deed to my lot, the letters from Frank, the dates proving I'd been here long before any HOA covenants existed. Then I read aloud the letter Karen had sent to a widow demanding $500 for an unapproved rose garden. Gasps filled the room. One man stood and said loudly, "That was my mother." Karen tried to interrupt, claiming it was board policy. But Sandra cut her off. "You haven't been on this board for a year, Karen," she said firmly. "You have no authority, no vote, and no right to represent yourself as a member. What you've done is abuse your neighbors." And then came the twist I didn't see coming. From the back of the room, a man in a tailored suit stood. Upit was the county clerk. "I was invited here because Mr. Daniels," he gestured to me, "provided documents showing attempts to alter public property records regarding his lot. Those changes were traced back to an unauthorized request from this neighborhood, and the email address belongs to you, Karen." The room erupted. Some shouted, others laughed in disbelief. Karen's face went crimson. She stood, sputtered something about miscommunication, and tried to leave, but Deputy Harris was already waiting by the door. "Ma'am, you'll need to stay for some questions," he said, blocking her path. She didn't get arrested that night, not yet, but the humiliation was complete. By the next week, the HOA officially banned her from holding any future position, revoked her access to any association materials, and sent a public letter to every resident explaining the situation. The county clerk's office opened a formal investigation into the property record tampering. As for me, I stayed on my lot, fishing in the mornings and grilling at night, waving to the neighbors who'd stop by to thank me for standing up to her. One evening, Frank came over with a couple of cold beers. "You know," he said, "you didn't just save your own hide, you saved the rest of us from years more of her nonsense." I just smiled, watching the sunset reflect off the water. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about winning a fight, it's about showing everyone else they can. 2. So what do you think? Was I right to take it this far? Or should I have just ignored her and let her embarrass herself?